I put that hymn in there today for a couple of reasons, but one is tempestuous seas and unknown waves in the midst of life. And the word is, fear not, I'll guide you, I'll pilot you. I also put it because this last year, around this time, my mother had her first hospitalization. And in her kind of dreamy, drug-induced mildness, she told me a story about this hymn, that when she was a little girl, probably 8, and her family, my grandfather and grandmother, and she and her brothers and sisters had moved from West Virginia, where she had grown up, because it was the banks had all closed, and my grandfather had lost everything in the banks. And there wasn't work, and he had moved to Illinois looking for work. And he had found a part-time job being the custodian at the church in Charleston, where they went. And she was going early on, I don't know if it was Christmas or not, but in the snow, early in the morning, or late at night the before, and it was snowing. And here's my mother, who was 8 at the time, and she's been ripped out of where she'd lived her whole life, and she'd been ripped away from her grandmother and grandfather and cousins that they all lived around, to this strange place where she knew no one. And they're walking up Polk Street toward the church. It's snowing, and in the street light she sees the flakes. And my grandfather is singing this. That's what she remembered. My grandfather was singing this as they walked up. And I think, when I think about that story, I think it must have been, gosh, you know, I can't imagine losing everything. The banks are closed. There's no teaching jobs, which is what he had done, what he was. And in the terrible uncertainty of the early 1930s, at a Christmas, not really a Christmas song, but at Christmas time in the snow, he was singing this. And I think he was trying to comfort himself and my mother that things would be okay. It was a new year. It was treacherous shoals, but they would be piloted through it. So it's kind of, I think, meaningful to me. So our gospel this morning, I'm going to do this a little differently. I'm going to bury the gospel in the sermon because it's a long story I'm going to tell, and it's easier if I sort of build the sermon into pieces of it. So, you know, this Sunday's reading comes from a story near the end of King David's life. He's been alienated from his son, Absalom, who's exiled and then eventually brought back to Jerusalem. But Absalom is was a petulant, overindulged child, as most of King David's children were. And he's sort of set himself up to lead a palace coup to oust David as king and put himself on the throne in his place. And he's driven with the troops loyal to him. Absalom is driven out of Jerusalem. David and his court and the troops that are loyal to David. And now they're poised in this story to counterattack. David and his general Joab are ready to go, and like many generals do or commanders do, he's trying to encourage his troops to fight and win. And he tells them to go out and defeat Absalom's army, but, he says, don't you dare hurt one hair on the head of my son, Absalom. This is the son who's trying to throw him off the throne. Don't hurt him, which is probably why he's turned out like he has. But so David's army, led by Joab, defeat Absalom, and he's fleeing. And it's the text says he has long, lustrous, beautiful hair, and he's fleeing on his donkey, and he goes under an oak tree, and his hair gets caught in the branches of the oak tree. This sounds a little far-fetched. So here he is, hanging by his hair from the branches of this tree, dangling. And General Joab, David's loyal, comes up and assesses the situation. And Joab has better judgment than David at this point. He is not convinced that if they take David alive, take Absalom alive, that Absalom will be contrite and penitent, and that'll be the end of it. He's pretty convinced that Absalom is a troublemaker. So he tells one of the troops, "Run him through with your sword." They kill him as he dangles there. So David's son is dead. Kills him. Now comes the hard part. Who is going to go tell David that despite the order not to touch Absalom's head, they have run him through with the sword? And that's where our reading begins. Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and carry tidings to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the power of his enemies." Joab, David's general, said to Ahimaaz, "You are not to carry tidings today. You may carry tidings to David another day, but today you shall not do so because the king's son is dead." And then Joab said to the Cushite, an Ethiopian, "Go, tell the king what you have seen." And the Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahaz, the son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "Come what may, please let me run after the Cushite." And Joab said, "Why will you run, seeing that you have no reward for the tidings you're delivering?" "Come what may," Ahimaaz said, "I want to run." So Joab said to him, "Run." And then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain, and he outran the Cushite. So Ahimaaz has already delivered an earlier message to David that he got a lot of credit for. He had been working with David's spies in Jerusalem to sabotage Absalom. So he thought, oh, it's another opportunity for me to look good in front of the king. But Joab refuses to let Ahimaaz go because the last messenger that delivered bad news to David lost his head. That's where we get that expression. You know, you kill the messenger when they deliver bad news. So Joab is really trying to protect this Ahimaaz from a possible death sentence. Instead, he's willing to send the Cushite, the Ethiopian, the foreigner, let him lose his head if David is angry at the news. But Ahimaaz doesn't understand Joab's trying to protect him. And he doesn't take no for an answer. He refuses to listen, and he keeps pestering Joab until Joab lets him run too. Ahimaaz overtakes the Cushite. He outruns him. And here's the second stage of our story, beginning at verse 24. Now, David was sitting between the two gates. He's in waiting for news of the battle. The sentinel went up on the roof of the gate by the wall, and when he looked up, he saw the man running alone. The sentinel shouted and told the king, and the king said, "If he's alone, there are tidings of the battle in his mouth." He kept running and came nearer. And then the sentinel saw another man running. And the sentinel called to the gatekeeper and said, "There's another man running alone." And the king said, "He must also be bringing tidings." And then the sentinel said, "I think the first one runs like Ahimaaz the son of Zadok." And the king said, "He's a good man. He'll bring me good tidings." So, 2 Peter's chapter. Now, when Ahimaaz gets to the king, he suddenly realizes, "Oh, what have I done?" If he tells David the truth, it may cost him. It might cost him his life. So he stands there before the king, and he lies. He's not really thought through what he's going to say when he arrives at his goal. And here's how the chronicler in 2 Samuel describes the scene, beginning at 28. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "All is well." He prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Blessed be the Lord, your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against the Lord my king." And the king asked, can you imagine? You can guess what he's going to ask. The king said, "Is it well with Absalom?" And Ahimaaz answered, "I saw a great tumult when the king's servant Joab sent your servant, but I don't know what it was all about." And the king said, "Turn aside, stand there." So Ahimaaz turned aside and stood. So, David is suspicious. So he has Ahimaaz stand aside. Ahimaaz had gotten there and he didn't know what to say, so he lies. Now our story says what happens next when the Cushite arrives. Beginning at verse 31. "Good tidings to my lord the king, for the Lord has vindicated you this day, O king, delivering you from the power of those who rose against you." And the king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with Absalom? Is Absalom okay?" And the Cushite answered, "May all the enemies of my lord the king, and all who rise up against you to do you harm, be like that young man." So, verse 32. The Cushite isn't as fast as Ahimaaz, but when he arrives, he's thought through what he wants to say. He's got a kind of careful, diplomatic, but clear answer for David about what's Absalom's fate, that Absalom is dead. So in this story, we have two people running a race. The Cushite is clear where he's running and who he's running to, so he's careful about the message, and it doesn't cost him his life. The other runner, Ahimaaz, may be stronger or faster or have higher social status, because actually Ahimaaz, it says at the beginning, is the son of Zadok, David's high priest. But he's not clear where he's going. He's not clear what he's trying to do. And so he fails in the mission he's taken on. It's a kind of a curious story, lost in the 2 Kings. But I think it's an interesting one to read at the turning of the year, because as we run the race of life into 2026, we need to be clear about where we're running and what we're trying to accomplish in life. At this time of year, we're bombarded with suggestions about how to reflect on what we want out of life as we enter a new year, about how terrible it is to make resolutions we're not going to keep, or here are some resolutions you could make. I read a recent article in the New York Times by Jancy Dunn, who suggested what was a good way to approach the turning of the year is not to think about what you want to accomplish in 2026, but to begin, before you do that, think back to 2025. And she has some interesting questions. Ask yourself, what made you most joyful in the past year? And how can you bring more of that to this coming year? Ask what it was in this past year that gave you energy, that you were enthusiastically engaged in, and what drained you or who drained you. And because there are always some things that take a lot of energy out of us and don't give us very much. So if you think about that, what would it take then, looking forward then, to add more of the energy givers to life and reduce the draining things of your energy? This is an interesting one she had. What seemed impossible, but you did it anyway? What seemed impossible for you to do, but you did it anyway? What would it look like to carry that strength, that resilience, that risk-taking into a new year? And another question she had, what did you waste energy and emotion trying to control that was really something completely beyond your control? We all end up doing that, don't we? Thinking we can control things that are really beyond our control. What would it be, thinking back where that happened last year, to respond differently in the coming year? To not waste energy on things that we can't possibly control. All those sound like sensible suggestions about running the race. Maybe Ahimaaz could use those questions. But the best advice on not having to end up like Ahimaaz and being like the Cushite in our story comes from an old meditation given in the early years of the 20th century by Henry Van Dyke, one of the famous New York City preachers of the time. It's not rooted in modern psychology, it's not really rooted in business consulting, but it's a deep read of the Bible. Van Dyke asks us, as we leave Christmas 2025 behind us and we put on our running shoes for the race of 2026, this question: are you willing to forget what you have done for other people and remember what other people have done for you? To ignore what the world owes you and to think what you owe the world. To put your rights in the background and your duties in the middle distance and your chances to do a little more than your duty in the foreground. To see that men and women are just as real as you are, and to try to look beyond their faces to their hearts, their hunger for joy. To own up to the fact that probably the only good reason for your existence is not what you are going to get out of life, but what you are going to give to life. To close your book of complaints against the management of the universe, and to look around you for a place where you can sow a few seeds of happiness. Are you willing to do these things for even a day? Then you can keep Christmas. Are you willing to stoop down and consider the needs and desires of little children? To remember the weaknesses and loneliness of people growing old? To stop asking how much your friends love you and ask yourself whether you love them enough? To try to understand what those who live in the same household with you really want without waiting for them to tell you. To trim your lamp so that it will give more light and less smoke, and to carry it in front so that your shadow will fall behind you. To make a grave for your ugly thoughts and a garden for your kindly feelings, with the gate open. Are you willing to believe that love is the strongest thing in the world? Stronger than hate, stronger than evil, stronger than death. And the blessed life which began in Bethlehem 1900 years ago is the image and brightness of eternal love. Then you can keep Christmas. And if you can keep it for a day, why not always? But you can never keep it alone. Amen.